Good morning and most welcome to 1485 of the series. I will do an introduction into something called aspect perception, and I will use an article of Jonny Thomson published in Big Think 2022. He's a scholar at Oxford, was it, yeah? Can a duck ever be a rabbit? Wittgenstein and the philosophy of aspect perception. Things are rarely simple. It's often not clear at all what something is. And even when you think you know, things can change in an instant. Consider the famous image above. Is it a duck or a rabbit? And the answer changes depending on you. The object itself is fixed. Go away for a cup of tea, and the image will be exactly the same. but something in your understanding or perception is shifting the object between duck and rabbit and back again. We cannot say it is definitely a duck or a rabbit. To different people and in different moments, it's either. This consideration of aspect perception was something that concerned the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, and it raises serious questions about the nature of reality and perception. Seeing as. In his work, Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein draws a distinction between two types of seeing. First, we have the standard and direct act of seeing. Interpreting the stuff that is broken down into sense data for the eyes. For example, you can see the light from your phone, the green on a tree, or the roundness of a table. But we also have the ability to notice an aspect, which is where we see an object as a certain kind of object. It means to have the same sensation, but to see it in a different way. And listen now. To the untrained eye, a blueprint schematic might be mere geometric maze-like squiggles. But to an engineer, it is seen as a blueprint. The engineer notices an aspect that others do not. This is very important for the understanding of aspect. It has to do with the background, the Befindlichkeit or the Geschichte. Let us suppose that two people come across an abacus. It might be that someone who doesn't know what an abacus is assumes it's some kind of toy or a strange ornament. You, though, will see an abacus in this instance. You are seeing as, which means that you see the object as a tool to be used in a certain way. But this ability to notice aspects can also shift and morph. In an example that Wittgenstein uses, consider the following dots. They can either be viewed as a whole, four dots in a group, or perhaps they might be seen as two dots in the middle, framed by dots on either side. The image remains the same, but our shift in perception is to notice an aspect. A ready-made world. We approach the world with concepts, and everything we see is filtered by those concepts. Often, what we're told by others or what we learn in life will redefine how we see objects and even people. As Wittgenstein wrote, I observe a face and then suddenly notice its likeness to another. I see that it has not changed, and yet I see it differently. I call this experience noticing an aspect. It happens often in life. Imagine a friend or a partner says, "Have you noticed that your dad looks just like Colonel Sanders?" My comment here is Colonel Sanders is the icon for Kentucky Fried Chicken. Or I've always thought Elijah Woods looks like Daniel Radcliffe. After this happens, you can't stop seeing that person as the look-alike. And you will forever snigger whenever you pass a Kentucky Fried Chicken. The odd moment comes, as in the duck-rabbit image, when you have two competing and equally viable perceptions of the object. You can spend minutes shifting your perception between both. The same is true for the necky cube. You can make it pop in or out, depending on how you want to see it. The necky cube we mentioned many times before in context with the Möbius strip and the Klein bottle, and they are sharing that feature. another comment is thinking of the blueprint. It is different zu Handenheit, to use an Heideggerian expression, between an engineer and me as an amateur or dummy in the area. You can see how neatly the subject or the observer is slowly knocking on the door and in a very subtle way entering into the limelight. But Wittgenstein's point is that these moments of being conscious of an object's transitive ambiguity are exceedingly rare. Objects usually have an immediacy to them, or are a ready-made understanding. It is not that we see an object and then interpret it as either a duck or a rabbit. Which is the common view among representationalists and empiricists. The idea of sense data being similar to perception, that they are sort of processed in the brain. We do not spend hours and all our mental energy rotating or twisting objects to then file against a gigantic catalogue of concepts to determine whether it is a certain thing or not. Instead, perceptions directly and instantly come to us as a duck or a rabbit. Our concepts frame our perceptions on the spot. It is directly. It is the collapse of the superposition. It does not take time. This is one of my claims I will make later, that Wittgenstein is modeling the collapse of the superposition. And it's an important feature that it doesn't take time. We will now talk about aspect blindness, which is a curious feature invented for pedagogical purposes by Wittgenstein. Aspect blindness. A curious feature of this is what Wittgenstein calls aspect blindness. This is where a person is incapable of seeing an object a certain way at all. It's impossible to be entirely aspect blind, because we always have at least one way of seeing that object. even if that's just raw visual data. And this is very close to the mood or Stimmung, Grundstimmung. We always directly, without hesitation and delay, see something as something. We don't have a Stimmung of complete aspect blindness or just raw sense data, whatever that would be. We are in the world together with it. But suppose, for an instance, that some people simply cannot see an actor or a picture as standing for something else. What if you go to watch a play and are utterly unable of seeing that prancing costume actor as being Puck, the mischievous fairy? And I also think, what if you don't see the devil? What if you cannot see the old woman in the classic old young woman illusion? What if ... and scratch does not appear as an emoji, but only a random assemblage of nonsense punctuation? Or how about me if trying to look into a newspaper in Arabic or Urdu? What do I see? Do I see the same thing as an Urdu speaker? Daniel Dennett would claim that it is all the same. The observer can be taken out of the equation. say it's a whole world of difference. Between me and the Urdu speaker. Years of practice, tradition, Geschichte, castedness. That makes for entirely different aspects. More telling, more complicated, deeper. The world is not a flat surface without depth. The depth comes from the interaction between the perceiving and the perceived. And the perceiving is not possible to subtract from the world. Not even if you were Bertrand Russell. We are cast in the world, and what the world is deeply connected to us. A person, in the example of Wittgenstein, who cannot see aspect, are called aspect blind. They see everything as assemblages of points or dots or colors. Because of distractions in their environment, a lack of prior learning, or simply some unknown psychological factor. But some people simply cannot see one thing as something else. We are all, if not aspect blind, definitely aspect ignorant to some degree. It might be that objects we assume are one thing actually have a host of hidden aspects waiting to be seen. Objects are not one thing, monosemic or simple, whatever they are. Even the four dots had astonishing depth. Maybe tomorrow a toddler will point out your car's lights look like a face. Or you'll read an article highlighting hidden images in logos. The previous way of seeing things becomes changed forever. My comment here, they can never be unseen or undone. The idea of a fresh look held by James Locke and David Hume is simply not of this world. We are inside the world. We are connected with a whole host of relations, and they are close to infinity. Myriads and myriads of experiences, memories, discussions, learning, acquiring skills. All this takes a decisive part in what becomes. I see connections here to many things. Yesterday we spoke about the true image of the text, the Stimmung, the real force. When you reach in for the text and go deeper, it will speak to you. That is being engaged in the outer, and thereby also making it inner. trope that comes to mind now is a relation to the Necker cube, a Klein bottle, where the subjective part is seen as creating the objective part by being different, by being asymmetric. You can see that as a widening, deepening of the world. That interactivity we went into Terry Marks Charlov some 100 episodes before, and she showed that the fractality of understanding and the exogenous fractality come together, and in the mid-zone presencing come. Both are needed for the temporal presencing to come to the fore, to show itself, to make itself something. Take away one side and it simply doesn't work. We can here see that aspect blindness, it's not a feature someone can have. In real life, we are always already in the world with all our connections, all the relations in a, if you like, relational universe. And it could be that what I call today ambiguity is what presents itself. I will add an example later from the book of Paul Johnston, which is excellent, very helpful for understanding how you participate. But it's incredibly important, the sentence, the previous way of seeing things becomes changed. And it will also change all the coming perceptions. And that is the fleeting movement of Befindlichkeit. You are in it. And it's necessary. Reality is a verbal process, if you like. That does not mean it cannot be static, but it is an interactive, moving process. Wittgenstein's examination of the duck rabbit image reveals to us the power of our learning and induction into our world's rules. When your teacher says, "This is an abacus," or your parents say, "That's a rhino," they are entering into your head, irrevocably and magnificently transform how you see the world. I will add Johnston here. Maybe I can put that just in pause. I will now continue to read a small paragraph from Johnston, Rethinking the Inner. So it's page 63. It's a bit more going deeper into the subject, but I will give a summary and an explanation, and also to the parallels I see between this and the Heideggerian expressions of Zuhanden and Vorhanden. In perspective of helping to understand these aspects of both Heidegger and Wittgenstein. The second paragraph on page 63, and he's discussing sense data as perspectives. The only plausible alternative is to treat sense data as perspectives. For at least this approach holds out the possibility of translating our current talk into a more philosophically correct language. And he's vaguely referring here to representationalism, the modern idea until recently of cognition, that it is made up of sense data to construct an image, which is then translated into an object. A bit like in this tube, I would spot yellowness, plasticness, extension, res extensa also comes in here, and the black hat that goes into my eye. Into my retina, and there into the visual cortex of my brain to be processed. So instead of learning to say, "I see a table," a child could be taught to say, I am experience view D of the table. Even here, however, the sense data would not be private, for the basis of the game would have to be a public definition of these experiences. And here is a very important point, aptly put by Johnston. We do not get away by doing the philosophically correct. We do not escape from having a mood. Even here, however, the sense data would not be private. For the basis of the game would have to be a public definition of these experiences. For example, each of the different views of the table might be defined in terms of a separate picture, and the child would be taught to use the view vocabulary by reference to these sample pictures. This seems to define a coherent possibility, but it is one that is parasitic on the game we currently play, and which contains a host of difficulties. How, for example, would the innumerable possible views of table be reduced to a finite but generally applicable set of perspectives? Furthermore, how will the individual apply the pictures defining the perspective? For if she tilts the picture, is it still a picture of the same view? Thus, the mechanics of a language of perspectives are by no means clear. But even if one could set up such a language, it is hard to see what point there would be in so doing. The possibility of paraphrasing our actual language in this way would not show that perspectives were the real furniture of the universe. And here's the point smashing in. The wish to reduce something into something else by adding a supplement that is parasitic in the end and hinders the language game. Like adding a noun in a perfectly understandable sentence. I see a house which is an object seen from a certain perspective. In fact, the notion of sense data and the accompanying idea of a world of sense impressions the idea that the chair and table of the external world are paralleled by a visual chair and table in our inner world simply offers a new way of looking at our language game. like the basic idea of a sense impression. It turns the description of the outer into the description of an inner. And shifts the focus of interest from descriptions of the external world to the individual's expression of her experiences. The idea of the visual room does not embody a new insight to what we really experience. Rather, it introduces a new way of speaking, a new comparison. One might almost say a new sensation. And here I think it becomes exceedingly clear that the homunculus of the inner world, as the seer of sense data, is deeply connected to the confusing panopticon, the renowned view from nowhere. The theoretical mode, to use a Heideggerian phrase, which is one mode among others. And I like the term parasitic by Johnston. Jacques Derrida uses supplément when we add something that already have wholeness. It becomes parasitic, doesn't have a role to play, but in the end it takes a part. Slowing things down, making them less penetrable, less easy to access. That's the computational thinking. It is burdened by unnecessary supplements that muddles thinking and speech. Let me go to the whiteboard here if Kelly could assist me. I took the liberty to change the image of Wittgenstein/Johnston into an area which I'm familiar with myself. And that is Chinese science. You can imagine a visitor to Japan entering into the metro station, and all over the place see different signs. According to the sense data proposer, he would somehow see the same thing as everybody else. Obviously, that is not true. He wouldn't be able to memorize, go into what they mean. And for me, I did have that experience. I was first exposed to unknown, for me, insignificant, meaningless scribble. Slowly, the images literally became clearer, like I bought a pair of fantastic goggles. It developed, it deepened, and as I saw more and more, there were more perception. And there was no instance of delay. Either you saw it or you did not. Perception is incastedness, Eintwurft. In your tradition, in your scale, in your life world. All the connections have a part. It's never a question of yes and no. And we know how that picture looked, and yes and no. It's an eye where the vision comes in, and inside it's a sort of screen. And sort of decipher it. And here we have, of course, the necessary little homunculus looking at the screen inside my head. And oddly enough, that's my second point, that will also sort of cause the second confusing thing. Because if the homunculus is doing a deciding process of what it is I'm seeing, there must also be, let me call it, independent world out there. Observer, non-dependent world, which I take in passively. like in the theater, just sitting, receiving the world, and then actively, like the active reason we mentioned earlier, have a process of understanding. Instead, I slowly learn to see in a new way. This thing here depicted looks vaguely like something, and I, in the learning process, I first have an idea it looks like a stick with some things put to it, like a broomstick. As learning progressed, in the end, it became a tree. And then, and this is important, it also got a sound. Ki, which is the word for tree. But here, and this is my third point, once that is established, slowly, you can see me like a small child in this way, naive to the world. I became more and more cast in the life world. And once I saw this sign, I could see it as a collection of trees, having the meaning a wood forest. Which would not have been possible without the first couple of months. A new vision is opening up, which is dependent on the public domain and also my innerness, my Dasein, in connection with what is Geschichte, tradition, knowledge, of course skill. It's exceedingly important. Things are not just out there. And to see them, so to speak, the word comes first. Because it's the role that something plays that makes it what it is. It is nonsensical to say that a fork is a collection of sense data, or atoms, or molecules. It does things. this is another approach to Zuhanden. They are pointing to similar things, Wittgenstein and Heidegger. For me, it was a revelation. Something had stopped the understanding of Zuhanden, and Heidegger has his rather short introduction to it. But it became obvious with the addition of another way of explaining it. I realized when I see a fork, I see the word. Why would the word be in the language game or in unsere Welt if it didn't have a purpose? Firstly, that is a very small example, I admit, but it is the Seinsfrage. The why. Why is it here? The more important question. That needs to be acknowledged for any understanding to progress. Vaguely, you can associate this, I say vaguely here, with the concept we mentioned yesterday, chirality. Being a fork is also an inner feature of the fork in its very constitution. It was built to be something. That sort of dissolves this idea in a natural way. And you also see, I did, that Vorhanden does exist. It is a mood, but you rid reality of almost all the feature. It's a constructed mood, very seldomly used. According to Martin Heidegger, and I leave the question open, he saw the development of technology, mass production of things and thinking, as the reason for the takeover of computational thinking. I would say even the illusion of computational thinking. In the end, it does not make that much sense, and slowly, it takes time, the illusion evaporates, and a truer, more lucid and world-based reality come to fore. A reality that has been hiding underneath the pointing finger on my thinking process. And when I go into it, it opens up a new dimension. And by doing that, the sign changes. There is an inner change within me. And all of a sudden we have a different concept. For you as participators in viewing and Kalle being here, the change would not be that obvious. But for me it is. I get into the truer word, which is this one, by letting the inner participate. And this is so simple, but it's so clear. This touching process means that all what's inside the hand, the right hand, is participating in the perception to make the perceived. And in this, there is of course a tremendous complexity. Fractal, we mentioned before, deepening everything. Maybe a question from Kalle here. Let's go. Put the microphone on you. There you go.
Thank you. Let me return to Wittgenstein's rabbit duck illustration. So he says that you can see it as a rabbit or a duck, and seeing is the same as interpreting it. There's no difference. And I would say that you could also say that the image also illustrates a hair. And let me give you an illustration. I say this, here you have a hair. Let's pretend that this is a piece of fur of a hair. And since this is a piece of the fur of the hair, it's both a hair, the animal, but also a piece of its fur. They are interconnected. And here we come to another point, homonymy. Homonymy is important, so while Wittgenstein proposed this image of a rabbit and duck, it can be two things, perhaps both things at the same time. I would add a third thing, that is the hair, and then I also add one of the way of, I add also the ear in form of the hair, which can be both things at the same time. I use the context to define, and sometimes it's both things as I present here. So we have to think about us. Wittgenstein speaks about blindness of seeing, and we can also think about blindness in hearing.
Aspect blindness.
Aspect blindness, thank you, aspect blindness. So we can also call aspect hearing. But
Yes.
aspect hearing. And in positive way, homonyms are a great way of going into aspect hearing. And they are also a way of understanding our reality. This is exciting, like this hair and the rabbit and duck illustration. And I give it back to you, Hans. It's already gone, so we have to was 1 hour 41 minutes. So.
Excellent, Kalle. Very good. Yes, homonyms. Aspect hearing is similar, and actually it gives even deeper pedagogical tools to understand this. Because if I say the Swedish word tång, can mean set of pliers, but also seaweed. But in my ear, if Kalle or someone else mention it, the perception will be direct. And I think what confuses people is I have to correct myself. If I misunderstood, Kalle maybe just said one word. For some mad reason he wanted to have seaweed. Do you have a plier? Those examples are used extensively by Greek philosophers already a couple of hundred years BC. You can see that the confusion was already established there. It's a trap to fall into. I confess, I did it myself many years ago. That Wittgenstein would explain that my correcting feature for the homonym would be a different language game. That doesn't take away the directness of my understanding. The language game of false hearing. And in certain languages, it is simply not possible to express or feel, as I would say, hearing wrong. It simply doesn't exist. It comes with the nouns. How do you mishear an action? So you see, it plays into the subject-object structure of our language as well. Neatly, like a hand in a kitchen glove. And I'm a fan of mysteries. I love when things are hidden in clear vision, like these things. And I love to go into how I misconstrued and you maybe, and how some things like homonyms can be beneficial, but they can somehow lead to a trap. Somehow, I say. So a homonym is exactly like a duck, rabbit or hare, as you say. And I also like the piece of fur of the hare, because it helps us from another thing, signed and signified for something, the hair. The piece of fur signifies the hair, but it's not completely different. It is still a part of the hair. And you can see socirsidea made a fragmented sort of misuse of language. Sign and signified, you get too far into this actually. That is that Kalle says something to me and I have to analyze that in my hearing. And there is a little listening homunculus. Did Kalle say hair or hair? At the point to hair, it does not work that way. I immediately believe something. If he points to the window, his action, his body, his eyes will make it absolutely clear he's not talking about my receding hairline. And that's the life world we often miss out on. We become too distracted, too busy, as Heidegger would have it, or we become numb, as Wittgenstein would say. And we dwell into the illusion that somebody pointing somewhere to the woods could possibly also mean a piece of human hair. Excellent, Kalle. Thank you very much for that additive. Any more comments? Thank you for this retake of Paul Johnston, and I hope you find it helpful to understand also 200 and 400. To see the participating role a word has in the life world, and that the word comes in a way first. Child hears the word fork, and later that child learns to distinguish from things that are fork-like, so his vision will change. It's not static out there. And it's an opening up into the world, taking incredibly important things in. I just have to add this. This is a good story about Wittgenstein, who started out on the wrong path. And an Italian mathematician said, when Wittgenstein explained that one word signified one thing in the world, word, world, listen carefully for the homonyms. He said, what is the word for this? Showing an Italian gesture. And that never left Wittgenstein and led, in the end, to a turn into a more understanding thinking. So I hope this can be like this for you. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.
Thank you.